So, as a guy over 40, you may have wondered, well, for fitness, what should I do? Like, how should I prepare myself physically for life after 40, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond? And what I want to do is I want to share with you something from exercise physiology that I think is going to be really helpful for you to to get your mind focused on the right things. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that if you're watching this, you're a guy over 40, number one. Number two is that you're someone who just wants to be generally fit so that you can perform very well no matter what comes up in your life, right? You want to be physically capable to do anything, right? For the most part. So here's the best way that we can approach this. So check this out. I've got this graph that I drew up here, and you'll notice my XY axis, my Y axis, I have power, right? And then on my X axis, I have, and I forgot to write it on here, it's time. So time, you'll see I've got a 5 second, I've got a 20 second, I've got a 1 minute, I've got a 5 minute, 10 minutes, and then 20 minutes. Not to scale, don't hold that against me. So here's what I want to show. I've got 3 different kinds of people here. And each person is represented by a different color line. So first thing to know is power. The human body outputs the most amount of power in short durations. Meaning, like, if I were to throw a fastball, if I were to do a really heavy deadlift, if I were to do some sort of an Olympic lift, if I were to do a 40-yard dash, right? The highest power outputs happen in the shortest durations of time. Right? So sprint type people who've been training just for weightlifting, sprint swimmers, sprint runners, right? Those really high power output athletes, they are represented by the black curve here. And you'll see the black curve because that's primarily what they train for. You know, they can output significant amounts of power, but that power for any human drops off very quickly. Right? It's why we can't sprint for a marathon, right? The sprint, you will slow down just because the human body is not designed to maintain very, very high power outputs for long periods of time. So you'll see this person who trains just sprint, as they get longer, their output drops dramatically. And you'll notice that they have the lowest amount of output as this time stretches on. Again, the reason being is because sprinters train this high power output, they don't train long duration. If you were to tell a sprinter, hey, guess what? Today we're going to go out and run 5 miles, they're going to be like, ugh, that's awful. Like, no, they don't want to do that, right? Now we have the opposite end of the spectrum here, which would be the marathon runner, right? Someone that does long distance things. It doesn't have to be marathon. It could be, a long distance swimmer, a triathlete. Right? But what they tend to do is they train out here, and that would be represented by this bottom blue line. They don't have very much power output, right? Like if you tell them to sprint, they tend to be very slow. They haven't trained those type 2 muscle fibers. They've really trained their aerobic capacity, and their muscles have sort of shifted to that. So they don't have very much power output. They don't have a lot of space under the curve here. But if you stretch them out for long periods of time, they can output at a pretty high level for long durations, right? So we've got 2 sort of opposite kinds of athletes here. We've got the high power athlete, and then we've got the low power athlete, or the aerobic distance person, right? So again, completely different adaptations. You can train for either one. And quite honestly, if you're in a specific sport, it's easy to train for just one thing. It gets a little more complicated when we're training for this sport of life. But that's where this person comes in, right? This is the person who I consider to be the guy over 40, just like you, if you're watching this. Again, not training for anything, but we want to have all of it. So how do we represent all of it? Well, we want the most space under this curve as possible, right? But you can see they're not the best at anything, right? They're not super, super high power, meaning they're not only training sprint stuff, high level strength stuff. They might be training some of that, but that's not their primary focus, right? They're also training some stuff out here as well. They're not going to beat the marathon runner, but they're going to do better than most people. And I think that's really what the message should be here is when we're training, we just want to train in a way that's going to give you the most amount of space under this curve. We don't want to just bias any one thing. We want the whole curve to go up. But when we train like that, it's more of a broad general type of training. Again, you'll never be the master of any one thing, but you'll be good at everything. And that's what we're looking for. As a guy over 40, I believe that's the most important thing that we need to train for. It's all of it. Now, that can be a little bit complicated, especially if you don't really know how programming works. If you're not really familiar with how these energy systems work, and there's all kinds of stuff behind this, then it's important to get someone to program for you, to understand this concept, and then to be able to program for you in a way that's going to allow you to be at your very best in your life, whether, again, no matter what it is that you like to do.